In this video, we'll be looking at question set 1 for the topic of genetics, starting on page 38 from the Topical Review Book Company's Living Environment Core Curriculum Workbook, 2nd edition. Question 1. The instructions for the traits of an organism are coded in the arrangement of... So immediately, when I see instructions for traits, I'm thinking of DNA. We also see another clue that we're talking about DNA with the word coded. When I see the word arrangement, I can replace that word with order. So this is just a basic, straightforward definitions question. If we can decode and understand that instructions for traits are talking about DNA and coded are also talking about DNA, then we can finish the sentence by saying the instructions for traits of an organism are coded in the arrangement of molecular bases. And if I can finish the sentence like that, the options become much clearer, and the answer is very easy to find out. The glucose units in carbohydrate molecules are not molecular bases. Option 2 says bases in DNA in the nucleus, and once we understand, if we're able to finish the sentence, then that's the obvious answer. We know that DNA is stored in the nucleus of eukaryotic cells. We know that the instructions are based on the sequence or the order of the molecular bases in DNA. Question 2. Scientific studies show that identical twins who were separated at birth and raised in different homes may vary in height, weight, and intelligence. The most probable explanation for these differences is that. So again, before we read the options, we want to decode and figure out what we know about the question. When we're looking at identical twins, we know that they're going to be genetically the same. And if those twins are genetically the same, they should have the same height, weight, and intelligence if they were raised in the same environment. However, we see that they were raised in different homes. Different homes means that their environment was different. We remember from the reading in the notes that environment can affect gene expression. Let's read through the options. Option 1. Original genes of each twin increased in the number as they developed. The number of genes in an individual is the same for every cell in their body, and if it's an identical twin, then that means that each twin, because they have the same genetic material, their number of genes will be the same, even after they're fully developed. So option 1 is incorrect. Option 2, one twin received genes only from the mother, while the other twin received genes only from the father. We know that this is incorrect because when sperm and egg fuse for fertilization, an individual gets half of the genetic material from the mother and half of the genetic material from the father. As identical twins, that's one sperm and one egg fused together, and then that zygote at some point split into two separate embryos. So just like every other individual on Earth, both of the twins got half of their DNA from their mom and half of their DNA from the dad. So option 2 is incorrect. Options 3 and 4 are worded very similarly, but one of them is correct and one is incorrect. Number 3, environments in which they were raised were different enough to affect the expression of their genes. Number 4, environments in which they were raised were different enough to change the genetic makeup of both individuals. We know that environment can affect gene expression, so in this case with identical twins separated at birth, potentially one twin goes to a wealthy family that has access to high quality nutritious foods that would lead to an increased height and a healthier weight, and a better school system that might change the intelligence level, the perceived intelligence level of the one twin, while the other twin goes to a family that's not as well off, so they can't afford the high quality foods, and maybe that second twin isn't as tall, might have a bit of a weight issue. It's not the genes that are changing between the twins, they're still genetically identical, but because they're in different environments, their genes are expressed differently. So the answer here is going to be option 3, because the different environments won't change the genetic makeup of the twins unless one of them is living in an area with high radiation or other mutagens. Question 3. For centuries, certain animals have been crossed to produce offspring that have desirable traits. Dogs have been mated to produce Labradors, Beagles, and Poodles. All of these dogs look and behave very differently from one another. This technique of producing organisms with specific qualities is known as... So looking at the reading, we see the word crossed. Generally, that means that two organisms are intentionally bred to combine their traits. In this case, those traits are desirable qualities. So while we're reading this, we need to understand, is this humans causing this, or is this happening naturally? Since the organisms are being intentionally bred for desirable traits, we can assume humans are doing it. Looking at the options, gene replication means copying of genes. We're not copying genes here, we're trying to pull out the best traits, so that is not correct. Natural selection is a natural process where favorable traits that help an organism to survive in the ecosystem naturally become more prominent. However, that does not involve humans, so that's not going to be the answer. Random mutations happen on their own at any time, and they may lead to specific traits that are desirable, but the individuals are not being bred specifically for those desirable traits. They're just appearing randomly. That leads us with selective breeding. In selective breeding, humans take two individuals of the same species and have them reproduce in hopes that the favorable traits that they like will appear in the offspring. This can happen in dogs, like the question says. So if you want a dog that's really good at swimming and doesn't get cold in the northern Atlantic Sea, you're looking at your Labradors. If you want beagles that will hunt mice really well, you breed for smaller, faster dogs. But it also works with crops. All of the food we eat was selectively bred over the last several thousand years since humans began cultivating their own crops. Plants were selectively bred to have bigger, tastier fruits, to grow better in maybe inclement weather or bad weather. So without humans' ability to selectively breed, to cross individuals of a species and produce desirable traits, we wouldn't be where we are today. All of our food, our companions, are all a result of selective breeding. Question 4. This one's a hard one. Which process will increase variations that could be inherited? So when I see increased variations, I'm thinking sexual reproduction and meiosis. And I know from the reading and notes that heritability, means the passing of traits from parents to offspring. So let's go over the options. 1. Mitotic cell division. Meiosis. Can that pass traits from parent to offspring? Yes. But does it lead to genetic variations? No. The offspring are going to be genetically identical to the parent. So that will not increase variations, and that will not be our answer. 2. Active transport. That is the movement of materials from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration with the use of energy, or ATP. Has nothing to do with sexual reproduction, increasing variation, heritability, so that's not our answer. Recombination of base subunit sequences. What does that mean? We'll come back to it. 4. Synthesis of proteins. That's going to be related to traits, so traits can be passed on, but synthesizing proteins does not change genetic variations, does not lead to genetic variations, so that's not going to be our answer. Let's go back to option 3. Recombination of base subunit sequences. We're talking about the bases in DNA and the sequence or the order of those. So with the base subunit sequences, we're talking about genes. Next, recombination. That's going to be talking about the fertilization that occurs between the sperm and the egg when they join. We're taking genes from the mom, genes from the dad, and we're recombining them after they've been separated during the process of meiosis. So when we see recombination of genes, we're thinking about fertilization, and that is going to be our correct answer, option number 3. Question number 5. The diagram below shows a process that can occur during meiosis. The most likely result of this process is what? If we refer to diagram 10 from the diagram section, we know that this is crossing over. We also know that in crossing over, that increases genetic variability. So with that, let's look at the options. The most likely result of this process is option number 1, a new combination of inheritable traits that can appear in offspring. So since the chromosomes are swapping versions of genes, we will get new combinations of those genes, which we can consider inheritable traits that can appear in offspring. We know that this can appear in offspring because we know crossing over occurs during meiosis. So that seems like a good option, but before we commit to it, let's read everything. Option 2, an inability to pass either of these chromosomes on to offspring. After crossing over, the chromosomes are still 100% viable and will still produce viable or healthy offspring if fertilization occurs with those chromosomes. So option 2, we know is incorrect. Option 3, a loss of genetic information that will produce a genetic disorder in the offspring. We're not losing genetic information, we're just mixing it up. So option 3 is incorrect. Option 4, an increase in the chromosome number of the organism in which this process occurs. We're not gaining or losing any chromosomes, so the number of chromosomes in the organism will stay the same. So option 4 is incorrect. And that means option 1 is our best answer because we're getting a new combination of traits on those sister chromatids that will be or can be passed down to offspring. That will wrap up this video. The next video will cover questions 6 through 10 of set 1 on pages 38 and 39 of the Topical Review Book Company Living Environment Core Curriculum Workbook, 2nd edition.